I feel like most fights occur because someone gave a look. You know what I'm talking about? Where you're looking around and then you turn around and realize that someone's kind of been staring at you or been giving you like a dirty look. And then, whether or not you are someone who likes to instigate, you might go and get into an argument with that person just because they gave you a look. When I was younger, I was really quick to assume the meaning of the look, the intention of the look, and it caused me to feel a lot of emotional distress. It was a very overwhelming experience that put me into a state of panic and anger at the same time. Which, if you have been the victim of receiving a look or if you have given a look, you know what I'm talking about. But today, in our discussion with peacemaking, I want to discuss why it's really important to bring humility to the table and why it's super important to not assume. After all, you know what they say, assuming makes a out of you and me. Before we begin though, my name is Mariah. I'm a certified Christian mental health coach, and I'm here to help you grow in emotional and spiritual maturity through biblically based holistic practices. You can find more details about that, how to grow in your emotional maturity. You can click a link in the bio, and that will get you a free guide for it's like 3 days or something like that. But be sure to check it out. I think that it'd be such a benefit to you. And don't forget to follow me over on my socials where we have conversations like this and more. All right, so before we get into the practical portion of really trying not to assume and talking about judging and what all of that looks like, and we're going to be talking about humility. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. But before we even get into it, I want to make a quick note about judgment. So you and I, we actually make judgments every single day, from what someone is wearing to how they said and when they said it, all of those things. Judgments help us make sense of the world, and not all judgments are bad. If you've been in church for any number of time, maybe you might have heard the phrase, judge not lest you be judged. And most of the time people say that because they're afraid that someone is going to criticize them or call them out on their behavior. So they say, oh, judge not lest you be judged. When really what that phrase is actually saying, what the real meaning behind that is, we are not to judge hypocritically. When we are making an assessment, when we are evaluating, that's another form of judgment. When we're making an evaluation, we want to be very mindful that we are checking ourselves first, making sure that we are not falling into the same trap as we make an assessment about someone else. And being a peacemaker requires you to make assessments. It requires you to have to figure out what is going on with the situation. You have to make judgments, and how you do that is with humility. So let me get a little practical for you when it comes to making assessments. And in order to do that, I kind of want to set a foundation of body language and some practical steps. So I actually recently read a book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. He put some really interesting points together about the everyday assumptions that you and I make about strangers, about other people. I think he did a really great job. He talked about different people in history who their body language, their demeanor, the different things that they did. You assumed one thing, you wonder why it ended up that way, but then you don't really know strangers at all. He had two assumptions that we make, you and I make as humans every day, that I thought were worth noting in our conversation about being a peacemaker. So the first thing that we do is we assume people tell the truth. Unless you're like that one rare percent. For the most part, if someone tells us something, we're going to take it as truth. We're going to believe that it's true. And that is how a normal functioning society happens. We have to believe that things are true. Otherwise, if there's too much distrust, you're going to have anarchy, and that is not good for anyone. So we assume that people are telling the truth, and we assume that a person's body language is transparent. So what that means is the person that served the look, that gave you the dirty eyes, that raised their eyebrows or did those things, really expressed what was going on inside their heart, and they weren't just randomly staring out into space and accidentally making a look at someone. Not that I know what that is. So let's talk about body language for a quick minute. Body language is this idea that how we respond physically is what we're feeling internally. So if someone is raising their eyebrows, or they're scrunching them, or they're very tight-lipped, we make assumptions about that. So if they're raising their eyebrows, they're in shock. If they're scrunching, they're upset. If they're tight-lipped, they have no real emotion. Maybe someone who's pacing back and forth is an anxious or agitated person. But in the book, Gladwell actually explains that just because a body language might have one meaning doesn't mean it's the meaning the person is trying to convey. For example, he gives a social experiment that was done for people that were cheating. They put them in a room and they gave them the temptation to cheat, and they had video cameras set up, and so the person would go and then they would either cheat or they wouldn't cheat. And then afterwards they were interviewed and asked if they did or did not cheat. When the person is asked, they would note the person's body language. Well, there was this one girl, her name was Nervous Nellie. She did not cheat. There's evidence she did not cheat, but her entire body language looked as if she did. And the people that were evaluating her thought she had cheated because of what her body language was conveying. But that's not true. So it's really important that we don't assume what's in a person's heart just because of the way that they look or the way that they are presenting. We really don't know the full truth. So we have to be careful when we're evaluating strangers. But what happens when we have close friends and families? Like, how do we convey that into the not assume? Because, like, you know these people, you know how they are. Well, it's really important that you and I look for behavior and patterns. When we get to know a person, we get to see their behavior and we can apply meaning to their behavior. So if there's someone who raises their eyebrows at you, maybe it's because they are thinking you're dumb and they maybe convey that, or maybe they're just surprised at the information. You get to know the person, you get to contextualize it and understand how a person responds, and then see if there's a pattern with that. And for all intents and purposes, the best that we can do is judge the behavior accordingly, according to what we know about the person, according to the patterns that this person has laid out. That is how we're able to judge. However, you do need to be very mindful to examine yourself first, because however harsh you judge another person is the same harshness that you are going to receive. That's in Matthew 7:2. So we need to be very careful. How do we judge correctly? How do we make correct assumptions? How do we make correct evaluations? We need to have the right perspective. And the only way that we are able to have the right perspective is through humility. Humility is understanding who you are in light of God. James is a really great book if you want to dive into what being humble looks like practically. But there is danger in thinking too little or too much of yourself. And humility understands hierarchy, it understands order, it understands that God has things designed in a certain way, and it doesn't determine my value, but rather it helps me know where to go in the order of things. So that way I know what I'm responsible for and what someone else is responsible for. And it reminds me that we are all created in the image of God, including the other person. So we have to be careful that we don't allow pride or insecurity to infiltrate our thinking. Pride is an overinflated view of self, and insecurity is an underinflated view of self. But really, they're just as two sides of the same coin. If you try to judge people from pride or insecurity, well, you don't really have to look far. You just look at social media, look at the gossip that happens in school or in work, look at people who get easily offended one way or another because they're either insecure or they're proud. Like, they're two sides of the same coin. So, in order for us to understand and judge correctly, we have to remember that God is the ultimate judge, and humility understands who you are when you stand before God. In order for us to be peacemakers, we have to have a humble mindset. So, what does the thought process of a humble person look like? I told you in James, he has the answers. In James 3:17, it says, "But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere." That is the foundation that we must have when we are going to have the mindset of humility in order to judge correctly. So the first thing that we do is we need to gather facts. We need to paint a clear picture of what is going on. I was talking to my husband the other day, and he asked me to connect the dots together. And I said, well, I have all the puzzle pieces, but I just haven't put them together. And when you're gathering your facts, you're literally just gathering the puzzle pieces. You're like, okay, this over here, and this over here, and this over here. And then once you've gathered all your puzzle pieces, then you're trying to put it together, which is the next portion, which is we seek to understand. When we're putting all these puzzle pieces together, We are trying to understand why the person did what they did. What was the meaning behind their behavior that caused the conflict? Was it the behavior itself, or was there something else? Was it intentional? Why was it intentional? And seeking to understand why someone does something the way that they do does not mean we agree with them, but it transitions us from being accusatory and being an accuser, saying, you are a terrible person, to being a peacemaker and trying to draw out a person's intentions, like it tells us in Proverbs 20, verse 5. And one of the best ways to be able to draw out intention and seek to understand is to be gentle, which I suck at. Like, I be first to tell you, I am not a gentle person. Most people know that. It does not come naturally to me. It is something I am actively working on. But when I remember how kind God has been to me, it helps me navigate even some really annoying people. We gather the facts, we seek to understand, and then we can't fake being humble. People can smell fake from a mile away. If you've ever been around any middle schoolers, they know when you're being fake, like for real. They can tell. So, a humble person needs to know who they are before God. They must seek to love God with their whole heart, soul, and strength. And I won't deny, this is a very difficult position to be found in, because when you love God, you eventually have to love other people because God loves other people and you love what God loves. But it's difficult because you want to be petty, and being petty, like, is funny, but it doesn't actually create peace. It tends to create more conflict. A petty person doesn't believe that God really has their back. And pettiness is a form of control. It's a way of getting back at another person or having the final say. And I would 100% be petty if God didn't humble me every time. So I've learned my lessons enough times to know that, okay, God, I won't be petty, but some days I just really want it. Some days I'm just really human. I say, okay, God, it's what it is. And it's okay to feel upset. It's okay to feel angry. You know, we've talked about it here. Like, I'm not going to tell you to not feel that. But being humble means that we don't let those emotions, those feelings dictate or override how we're supposed to respond. Because ultimately, we want to be people who bring life and bring peace. Because that's what we're called to do as peacemakers. We have experienced the life and peace that Jesus died for. We've been reconciled to God, and it is our job to go out and reconcile other people as much as we can, as much as depends on us. So if you deal with difficult conflicts, if you have a hard time making correct judgments, just kind of remember how difficult you were, still are, and God humbled himself for you. He didn't have to, but love compelled him. So let love be what compels you, not for the love of people, because let's face it, people are annoying, but really for the love of God, and his love will help you love others. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this video was a blessing to you. Let me know, are you a petty person? Are you someone quick to make judgments? Or, do you have a hard time calling things for what they are? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And I will catch you in the next one.